ASEAN partners over in Jakarta, South Korean President Yoon calls for an immediate halt to any military cooperation attempts with North Korea, saying it harms international peace. North Korea will pay a price if it provides weapons to Russia. This warning coming from the White House amid speculation that Kim Jong-un plans a travel to Russia to meet Putin. Japan's Fukushima water discharge was yet again among the many contending issues at the National Assembly as the government Q&A session reaches its second day. It's September 6, 2023. This is News Center. Good evening. Thank you for joining us. I'm Yoon. The only place to begin with this evening, Jakarta. President Yoon on Wednesday held a dialogue with the 10-member ASEAN bloc and outlined ways to put into action his Korea-ASEAN Solidarity Initiative, which pursues freedom, peace, and prosperity in the region. The South Korean leader also called for greater cooperation at the ASEAN +3 meeting with Japan and China, particularly on curbing North Korea's nuclear program. We connect with our correspondent Oh Soo-young at the Korea Press Center in Jakarta. Soo-young, first, walk us through what the president had to say about the recent speculation surrounding North Korea and Russia.
Sure, Jong-min. First, on North Korea's missile and nuclear threat, President Yoon said attempts at military cooperation with North Korea that harm the peace of the international community must be stopped immediately. This came at the ASEAN +3 meeting attended by President Yoon, Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida, and Chinese Premier Li Qiang. Now, Yoon said that the international community must unite and clearly show that it will not sit by idly and ignore North Korea's nuclear and missile development. He asked for the ASEAN leaders' interest in cooperation in banding together to block the sending of overseas workers and illegal cyber activities by the North, which are all used as a source of gathering funds for North Korea's nuclear and missile weapons programs. Now, he's expected to raise the issue again continuously, including at the East Asia Summit on Thursday, where Russia and China will also participate.
Right. This year, Beijing was represented by Premier Li Qiang instead of President Xi Jinping. But still, it seems President Yoon introduced measures to cooperate on important topics.
Right, you are, Jong-min. So as South Korea is the rotating chair of the +3 countries this year at the ASEAN Summit, President Yoon put forward ways to cooperate more closely with the regional bloc between the Northeast Asian countries. He suggested 3 points: increasing resilience by ramping up rice donations for food security, building an electric vehicle production base in ASEAN, and also increasing supply chain security. On top of that, investing in the future generation by nurturing talents in science. He further called for trilateral efforts between Seoul, Tokyo, and Beijing to ramp up cooperation with ASEAN.
이른 시일 내에 한일 중 정상회의를 비롯한 3국 간 협력 메커니즘을 재개하기 위해 일본, 중국 정부와 긴밀히 소통해 가고자 합니다. 최근 한일 관계 개선을 통해 한미일 3국 협력의 새로운 장이 열렸듯이 한국, 일본, 중국 3국 협력의 활성화는 아세안 +3 협력의 새로운 도약을 위한 발판이 될 것입니다.
And Soo-young, President Yoon also elaborated on his Korea-ASEAN Solidarity Initiative into action with measures to pursue freedom, peace, and prosperity in the region. Tell us more about that.
Sure. So at his bilateral dialogue with the 10-member regional bloc this morning, President Yoon laid out various measures to set his Solidarity Initiative into motion, which he introduced last year in Cambodia. Now, first of all, on regional security, President Yoon proposed strengthening cooperation in the defence industry with greater dialogue between the two sides, also cybersecurity and tackling transnational crimes, along with strengthening maritime security cooperation. Then highlighting the dire need to respond to non-traditional security issues such as climate change and public health, the South Korean leader reaffirmed support for the $19 million Korean-ASEAN Methane Action Initiative to bolster the regional bloc's climate response, and also to build up its capacity to produce vaccines and develop treatments for infectious diseases. And of course, with ASEAN being Korea's second largest export market, the president presented ways to strengthen economic links. First, with a flagship program starting next year to promote collaboration between Korean and ASEAN youth on digital technologies and artificial intelligence. Yoon also further pledged contributions to the sustainable development of Mekong countries. And the president really took this ASEAN opportunity to highlight Busan's bid to hold the 2030 World Expo, a city that happened to host two Korea-ASEAN commemorative summits in 2014 and 2019. Yoon said that South Korea could share its own developmental experience with many maritime countries, including in the ASEAN, and he asked for the regional bloc's support so that South Korea can indeed use Busan as a platform for the good of humanity. That's all from me for now. Back to you, Jungmin.
All right, that was our presidential office correspondent Oh Soo-young in Jakarta. And on the sidelines of the ASEAN Summit, President Yoon had a packed diplomatic schedule as he separately met with Cook Islands Prime Minister Mark Brown, where he pledged more support for Pacific Island nations. He also met Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau for closer cooperation. Lee Jae-hyun reports.
President Yoon Sung-yeol on Wednesday during a summit with Cook Islands Prime Minister Mark Brown pledged that Seoul will increase the size of the Republic of Korea Pacific Islands Forum Cooperation Fund. Yoon also pledged to increase official development assistance for Pacific Island nations to strengthen ties with these countries in responding to climate change, food crisis, and the digital divide issue. He also said that South Korea is currently running a joint project customized to each nation and requested support for South Korea's bid to host a 2030 World Expo in Busan. The two leaders met on the sidelines of annual summits involving the Association of Southeast Asian Nations in Jakarta, Indonesia, where they exchanged thoughts on developing bilateral relations. They highly evaluated the fact that the two countries have actively continued interactions since the previous meeting of the South Korea Pacific Island Nations Summit in Seoul back in May. The presidential office also said that they discussed cooperation in the maritime and fisheries fields too, while pledging to work together for the Cook Islands' successful launching of the Pacific Islands Forum and Post-Forum Dialogue in November. After that, President Yoon also met with Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and said it felt like meeting a close friend.
제가 작년에 취임 이후에 나토 또 UN 그리고 작년에 G20 또 올해 히로시마 G7 또 이번에 이런 다자 여러 차례의 또 이번에 빌뉴스에서도 얼마 전에 뵙고 그런 수많은 다자 회의와 또 양자 여러 차례 양자 회담을 통해서 이제 우리 저스틴 트루도 총리님은 가까운 친구가 된 것 같습니다.
In response, Trudeau also expressed his gratitude towards South Korea for helping to fight Canada's wildfire.
It's been a year of us working together through wonderful times, but also through difficult times. The support of Korean firefighters was something that was felt deeply across Canada during our difficult summer.
The Canadian leader also highlighted that Canada is closely cooperating with South Korea in a variety of sectors, including measures to impose sanctions on North Korea. Lee Jae-hyun, Arirang News.
The White House says North Korea will face consequences if it seals an arms deal with Russia for its war in Ukraine, as it has already put in place specific sanctions targeting their weapons trade. And pundits speculate that Kim Jong-un and Putin will also likely discuss overseas workers in addition to arms sales. Our foreign affairs correspondent Bae Eun-ji has more.
Amid speculation that North Korean leader Kim Jong-un is set to visit Russia next week to meet with Vladimir Putin to discuss arms sales, the White House has warned that North Korea will pay a price if it provides weapons to Russia.
Providing weapons to Russia for use on the battlefield to attack grain silos and the heating infrastructure of major cities as we head into winter, to try to conquer territory that belongs to another sovereign nation, this is not going to reflect well on North Korea, and they will pay a price for this in the international community.
The U.S. National Security Advisor also noted that Washington has been imposing specific targeted sanctions as recently as mid-August to disrupt any effort to use North Korea as a source for weapons going to Russia. Regarding the matter, South Korea's Defense Minister Lee Jong-suk also confirmed that there is a possibility that Kim and Putin could meet. During a parliamentary session on Wednesday, he projected that North Korea could ask for technologies to develop new weapons, and Russia could ask the regime to provide ammunition and other military supplies. Media outlets have already suggested a possible route that Kim is likely to take to travel from Pyongyang to Vladivostok, where he would meet with Putin. Citing American and allied officials, the New York Times reported Monday local time that Kim would probably travel by armored train. Meanwhile, pundits say the two leaders may also discuss the issue of North Korean migrant workers. Under UN Security Council resolutions, all member states are required to send back any North Koreans earning income in their jurisdiction to stop them from earning foreign currency for North Korea's nuclear and ballistic missile programs. But thousands of workers still remain in parts of Russia. With North Korea hoping to send workers overseas to earn foreign currency and the Ukraine war causing labor shortages in Russia, there is a possibility that the two countries could agree on sending more laborers. 배은지, Arirang News.
U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken reportedly made an unannounced visit to Ukraine's capital on Wednesday morning. Citing Ukrainian news outlets, Russia-owned Sputnik News reports that the top U.S. diplomat arrived in Kyiv on an official visit. One Ukrainian media outlet said the possibility of Blinken's visit was anticipated the day before, but the U.S. State Department had refused to comment. Due to security concerns, allies' visits to Ukraine are usually not announced in advance. Blinken was last in Kyiv in September 2022 when he met President Zelensky and discussed U.S. assistance to Ukraine. One of the big arms buyers in Europe, Poland, is currently hosting one of the region's largest defense trade shows, and the South Korean military technology is taking center stage. Our defense correspondent, Min-jung, tells us how.
The 31st International Defence Industry Exhibition kicked off in Poland on Tuesday. For the second time, South Korea is participating in Europe's third-largest defense trade show as the lead nation. A total of 30 domestic companies are taking part in the exhibition this year, including Korea-Aespace Industries, or KAI, Hyundai Rotem, and Hanwha Aerospace. Polish President Andrzej Duda visited the Korean exhibition hall and expressed great interest in Korean-made weapon systems. KAI displayed models of the F-A-50 light fighter deployed in the Polish military, as well as the KF-21 multi-purpose fighter, which is reportedly set to begin its initial production phase next year.
Because the KF-21 is in the development stage, we have not been putting much effort into its promotion so far. I believe that this exhibition has become an opportunity for strategic promotion not only in Poland, but also in Europe and the entire world.
KAI further solidified its position in the Polish market by signing an MOU with the state-owned defense firm Polish Armaments Group. This is expected to pave the way for strengthening marketing activities for Korean weapons in other parts of Europe as well. Visitors were also drawn to Hyundai Rotem's K2 tank on display outdoors in between a German Leopard and an American Abrams tank. The South Korean tank is currently being used by the Polish Army.
I can feel a huge improvement to the K2 compared to the T-72 tank I used to drive. I feel an incomparable difference in the propulsion and the performance of the tank. Riding the K2 is fun.
South Korea's unique role in the exhibition is seen as a natural consequence of Poland's large-scale purchase of military equipment from South Korea in 2022. Last year, the two countries signed a landmark defense deal worth a total of $12.4 billion. Min-jung, Arirang News.
On this second day of the government Q&A session at the National Assembly, both ruling and opposition parties continue to grill ministers and officials regarding the response to the Fukushima wastewater discharge, among other key topics. Our National Assembly correspondent Kim Jong-sil reports.
The second day of government questioning began once again with lawmakers demanding its views on the release of Fukushima wastewater.
Does the Prime Minister believe that the discharge of Fukushima treated wastewater has violated the sovereignty of Korea?
What you just said has nothing to do with our sovereignty. What's important is that we continue to work with the international community to monitor and surveil the safety of the wastewater discharge in order to protect public health and safety.
The main opposition party reiterated this line of questioning on the discharge.
South Korean Navy ships use a freshwater generator when they are at sea to remove salt from seawater and make it drinkable. However, the generator cannot filter out radioactive substances. So if someone drinks that water, they would be drinking radioactive water.
We'll be conducting tests in 200 locations in Korean waters regarding the discharge. We're even considering conducting tests in the East Sea outside Japanese waters. None of the 52 million Korean people will understand what you said about our naval sailors drinking contaminated radioactive water.
Other questions followed on diplomatic issues and inter-Korean relations. Unification Minister Kim Yong-ho was asked what he thought was the best way to secure peace on the Korean peninsula.
In order to achieve the true meaning of peace on the Korean peninsula, the North Korean nuclear issue must be resolved as an utmost priority. Until North Korea comes forward for dialogue, I think it's important to establish a strong nuclear deterrent system in cooperation with the U.S.
The interpellation will continue until Friday, with Thursday's session focusing on issues related to the economy. And it's likely the remaining Q&A sessions will also be fierce. Kim Jung-sil, Arirang News.
The first domestic case of the newly designated coronavirus variant called Pirola has been reported. Experts say it's a highly mutated variant and there's an increased possibility of widespread transmission. Lee Si-hoo with more.
South Korea on Wednesday reported the first case of the new highly mutated BA.286 COVID-19 variant, dubbed Pirola. The Central Disease Control Headquarters announced that a person was confirmed to be infected on August 31st. It's presumed the patient was infected locally as they have no history of overseas travel. The patient is in good condition and so far there have been no additional infections due to them being in contact with other people. Pirola has captured the world's attention as it has more than 30 mutations on its spike protein compared with its closest ancestor BA.2. The spike protein plays a critical role during coronavirus infection and it's a part of the virus that vaccines aim to neutralize.
While we don't know all the details yet, what we do know does raise the possibility that this new variant could potentially evade current immunity to increase transmission, for example. And it could also potentially be of higher severity than variants that we've seen lately.
Over 30 cases of the variant have been confirmed around the world as of Monday. Meanwhile, the government announced also on Wednesday that it's expanding the size and scope of its COVID-19 vaccine side effects compensation. The ruling People Power Party and the administration said they will pay up to 30 million won, or some $22,000 to families whose loved ones died within 90 days of vaccination and whose cause of death has not been confirmed by an autopsy. At present, up to 10 million won is paid to families of those who died within 42 days. In addition, more research on vaccine safety will be conducted and increased funding for medical equipment will be allocated. Lee Si-hoo, Arirang News.
With the variety of mobile payment services now available in South Korea. More people in the country are using them. The number of transactions in the first half of this year is up 13% compared to the same period last year. With Apple Pay now available in the country and with the steady usage of Samsung Pay, according to the Bank of Korea on Wednesday, there were nearly 26.3 million cases of mobile payments. The total amount spent on average each day in the first half came to more than 845 billion won, or around $635 million US. Wireless transfer services also saw an on-year increase of over 24% in terms of the number of transactions. The human face is replacing passports and boarding passes for travelers departing from South Korea's Incheon International Airport. Our Lee Soo-jin went there to test out the airport's new facial recognition system.
Passengers at Incheon International Airport are facing new technology. The new Smart Pass service at the country's largest airport streamlines the passenger identification process by using facial recognition technology. Passengers no longer need to take out their passports and boarding passes at departure halls and boarding gates. All they need is their face. Both foreign and South Korean nationals aged 7 and above can register for the new service with 2 ways to opt in. One way is by downloading the SmartPass mobile app and registering by scanning your passport and face. While airports in other countries have already implemented similar facial recognition systems, the one at Incheon Airport is the only one where users can register on mobile apps. Passengers can also register on site at self-check-in kiosks. Just like the mobile app, all you have to do is scan your passport and register your facial biometrics 30 minutes before you need to use the service. The mobile app and the self-check-in kiosks are both available in English, Korean, Japanese, and Chinese. Your facial identification data is also valid for 5 years.
And now you can simply walk up to the camera and go through right away without needing to show anyone your passport or your boarding pass.
So far, people from 46 different countries have registered, according to an airport official. It has also been well received by passengers since it was first introduced in late July during the peak summer holiday season.
And you don't need a lot of people manning it, and it's all very automated. You just check in and then you're kind of done.
Before, we used to wait a long time, but the identification process is a lot more convenient and faster, which is why I decided to sign up for this service.
Incheon Airport officials say that it'll also enhance security as human biometrics are impossible to duplicate. And it's being done without compromising passengers' privacy.
We regularly delete private passenger information according to related laws.
The airport is looking to expand the service, which is currently available at all 6 departure halls and 16 boarding gates, so that it can also be used at all gates by April 2025. Lee Soo-jin, Arirang News.
The Cultural Heritage Administration put on display for the first time on Wednesday a lacquer-ware box with inlaid mother-of-pearl that was repatriated from Japan in July. The lacquered box had been in a private collector's storage unit in Japan for over 100 years and is assumed to have been made during the Goryeo dynasty in the 13th century. The artifact has significant meaning as it is representative of the Goryeo era's mother-of-pearl designs, is well preserved, and its existence was unknown to academia until its recent repatriation. Around the world, there are less than 20 examples of such Goryeo dynasty era lacquer-ware boxes with inlaid mother-of-pearl. This new addition means that 4 of them are now here in South Korea.
Unseasonable heat is baking much of South Korea for the daytime. The dominant high-pressure system is bringing temperatures close to what we see in July and delaying the arrival of fall. The nation will see this pattern of heat with highs of 30 to 31 degrees for the next few days. Relatively breezier mornings are expected, so be mindful of wide temperature gaps. Places like Uiseong will see lows starting off at 14 degrees, but maximum temperatures will be jumping to 30 degrees. Conditions are especially warm for western regions. Heat wave advisories are in place for the Seoul metropolitan area and parts of Jeollado provinces. This means that sensible temperatures will exceed 33 degrees. And for the East Coast, violent winds are in store until this Friday. Winds will be gusting as fast as 20 meters per second. And for the coastlines of Gyeongsang-do provinces and Jeju Island, high ocean waves are in the forecast. It is highly recommended to refrain from fishing and boating. Under sunny skies, Seoul will be starting off at 20 degrees tomorrow. Highs in Seoul will get up to 31 degrees, Daejeon and Chuncheon 30. Busan will be topping out at 28 degrees. And clear skies will prevail for the remainder of the week. That's all for now, and here are the weather conditions around the world.
That is News Center for tonight. Thank you for watching. A panel session is coming up.
Welcome. 엄청난 에너지를 춤으로 뿜어내는 나라. 감당할 수 있겠니? 하나, 둘, 셋.
Hey, Mr. Cupid, make sure you listen to what I say. I may be stupid or quite naive.
끝없이 쏟아지는 포토스팟. 휴대폰 한 대로 감당할 수 있겠니?
Straight through my heart.
웰컴. (24시간) 불이 꺼지지 않는 나라. 감당할 수 있겠니? 한국에 오면 먹어야죠. 먹어도 끝이 없는 나라. 감당할 수 있겠니?
Stories on site. From Korea to the world, and from the world to Korea. We ask questions every day that could change the world. Taking news a step further, Arirang News. You're watching Arirang News. You're watching Arirang.
엄청난 에너지를 춤으로 뿜어내는 나라. 감당할 수 있겠니? 한국에 오면 먹어야죠. 먹어도 끝이 없는 나라. 감당할 수 있겠니?
Good evening. It's Wednesday, and you're watching Within the Frame. I'm Kim Do-yeon, filling in for Kim Bo-kyung. North Korea's missile launches have become the norm here on the peninsula in recent years, with Pyongyang testing dozens already this year. What's now more concerning is signs of Russia and even possibly China starting to work with North Korea military-wise. Claims that North Korea is selling weapons to Russia has long been around, and a recent report says Kim Jong-un himself might be traveling to Russia to meet Putin to ramp up military cooperation, as Russia is in need of more firepower in its invasion of Ukraine. To this, just hours ago, President Yoon Suk-yeol says any attempt at military cooperation with North Korea should stop. So does the current situation put North Korea on the map even more? And will its role in the current situation in East Asia get bigger, especially considering China's relation with North Korea and Russia? We have two experts to discuss this issue with us today. First, we have Dr. Go Myung-hyun, a senior fellow from the ASEAN Institute for Policy Studies with us. Welcome as usual.
Thanks for having me.
We also have Evans Revere, a senior advisor at Albright Stonebridge Group and former acting assistant secretary of state for East Asian and Pacific Affairs of U.S., joining us virtually all the way from Spain. Thank you for joining us from so far away.
My pleasure. Good to be with you.
Now, Evans, I wanted to start with you. Kim Jong-un appears to be placing a strong emphasis on North Korea's weapons production program, with allegations that an arms deal with Russia is on the cards. A recent report by the New York Times goes as far as to say that Kim is due to travel to Russia for talks. So are these actions primarily driven by North Korea's economic considerations, or are they also intended to showcase military prowess?
Well, let me begin by saying that the New York Times report that you just cited sounded quite authoritative and very well sourced. So I would not be surprised to see Kim Jong-un on his train heading for Vladivostok at some point in the next several days. But to your question, I think there are several factors that are driving this effort, this arms-related effort by North Korea. There are economic factors, strategic factors, and tactical factors here. First of all, as you suggested, the North Korean economy is in trouble. North Korea continues to suffer from serious food shortages. There are also fuel and other material shortages going on. And the Russians are in a position to help both with food and fuel, just as China is helping North Korea today. So this would provide North Korea with another source of assistance to deal with its economic challenges. I think North Korea is also seeking technology, however, in reaching out to the Russians in this way, especially military missile-related technology, since a number of the North Korean missile systems that are deployed or under development have their origins in Soviet era or earlier Russia era, Russian Federation era related missile systems. So if the North Koreans are going to improve their missile systems, one way of doing that would be to try to get some assistance from the Russians. And meanwhile, the Russians are in dire need because of the Ukraine war. They're in dire need of some basic artillery shells and other ammunition. And North Korea is very good at producing basic ammunition, including basic artillery shells. And by providing such military assistance to the Russians, the North Koreans, I think, would strengthen their relations with Moscow and thereby perhaps ensure that Russia will continue to support North Korea in the UN Security Council, for example. And finally, both Russia and North Korea, I think, have a shared interest in keeping the United States off balance and by providing ammunition to the Russians where they would use it in Ukraine. In providing that ammunition, the Russians, of course, would help keep the United States and NATO off balance. And the North Koreans, of course, would send a shot across the bow, so to speak, of the United States by indicating that it has other options, including military options of cooperation with the Russian Federation.
Right. Now, Dr. Goh, so building on from this, talking about military cooperation, there are reports suggesting a potential joint North Korea and Russia naval exercise. To what extent do you think this is a reliable information, and what does that bring to East Asian region?
So I think there's clearly a significant possibility of Russia and North Korea conducting joint military drills. We know that Kim Jong-un has been inspecting the naval facilities in the last couple of weeks, and this could be a point towards the possibility of having this exercise. But at the same time, Russia has been kind of ambiguous about this, even though Shoigu himself, the Minister of Defense of Russia, has been hinting at this here and there about this some sort of a joint military exercise with North Korea, even involving China. But then officially Russia has neither confirmed or denied this. So I think there's probably an objective behind this, which is that, as Evans has said, Russia or North Korea might want to keep not just the United States, but also Korea and Japan off balance by creating this uncertainty about tightening relationship between North Korea, Russia, and China. But then at the same time, I have to understand that embracing North Korea could be quite toxic, even for a country like Russia, which is right now in a desperate situation because of the war, stalemate taking place in Ukraine, as well as the fact that Russia is one of the most isolated countries in the world at the moment. But then in the long run, it would be in the interest of Russia to embrace North Korea to this extent. So I think this is another side to this equation. So there's no incentive for Russia to embrace North Korea because of the logistic issue of having the artillery share supply by North Korea for the war in Ukraine. But at the same time, in the long run, diplomatically speaking, it's in the interest of Russia not to embrace North Korea.
Right, and you bring up a good, interesting word, toxic, right? And in terms of long run. And just in time, President Yoon is at the ASEAN Summit, and he says that anyone that works with North Korea in terms of military should stop, right? So, and he also, even before that, said North Korean threat is not just to South Korea, it's to ASEAN members as well. So how are ASEAN members actually taking this, do you think, and what do you see the reaction from ASEAN members?
So I think ASEAN members are I think, for example, in the ASEAN, its membership is very diverse. Different countries in ASEAN in the groups have different opinions about the ongoing war in Ukraine. Some countries, such as Indonesia, sounds a little bit more neutral about the war, seems to be friendly towards Russia, whereas some other countries are not. But then I think there's a common perception in ASEAN that if you take Russia out and you look at the alignment between the three countries here, North Korea, China, and Russia, there's this understanding that could be threatening not just to the Northeast Asian countries like Korea and Japan, but also to ASEAN countries in Southeast Asia, especially China. I think China recently released a map, an official map, that shows the entirety of Chinese territory, and that includes, in fact, the 9 dotted lines that includes most of the South China Sea, which is also claimed by the ASEAN member states of the ASEAN group, so such as Malaysia, Vietnam, and the Philippines. So I think that really heightened the level of a threat perception among the ASEAN members, not about Russia per se, but about China, which is a big part of this alignment that's taking place right now. So I think in that sense, I think President Yoon's speech that outlined this changing landscape and the need for the democratic and free states to join together to face up this threat collectively probably had some echo, and then I think had some good reception there.
Right, and you bring up China, which I wanted to bring up next. President Yoon actually has called on China to do more when it comes to dealing with North Korea's actions that go against UN security resolutions. So how do you see this, Evans, China receiving this, and will there be a cooperative effort between Seoul, Beijing, Tokyo going forward to calm things down in Pyongyang, as President Yoon suggested just earlier today?
I don't believe the Chinese are particularly interested in helping the Republic of Korea right now in the UN Security Council, nor do I think that they're interested in helping the United States in the Security Council right now. If you look at Beijing's recent behavior in the Security Council, it's very clear that Beijing has aligned itself with Russia in providing support for the North Koreans in the Security Council and protecting the North Koreans in the Security Council. The PRC has long since made a strategic decision to strengthen its relations with Pyongyang, and that's being manifested in Chinese behavior for the last, I'd say, 4 years or so. Chinese actions in the Security Council are clear evidence of this strategic shift that we've seen on the part of the Chinese. But the Chinese, maybe even more importantly, have also shifted their position on the North Korean nuclear weapons program, whereas at one point the Chinese were adamantly opposed publicly to that nuclear weapons program and voted so in the UN Security Council. Right now, I think the Chinese position is that Beijing is prepared to live with a nuclear-armed North Korea. And unfortunately, I don't see any prospects that this position is going to change anytime soon. And quite frankly, I don't see the Chinese having any serious interest in working with Seoul and Tokyo together in unison to deal with North Korea. There may be some nice diplomatic words said out of Beijing about regional cooperation on matters of mutual concern, but the reality is that the Beijing that we're dealing with today is a very different Beijing than the one that we were dealing with, let's say, in 2017, 2018, when it came to dealing with North Korea.
Right, now, so let's go the other way. Will China work with North Korea? And given the increasing military cooperation between China and Russia, there are speculations that North Korea may become more closely involved in the regional strategies. Dr. Goh actually mentioned some of the aggressive stance that China took against ASEAN members. So what are potential developments can we see going forward with North Korea?
That's a good question. I think it would be fair to say that North Korea is already working with Russia and China on their respective regional strategies. By posing a military threat to the Republic of Korea and to Japan, two key American allies, North Korea has greatly complicated the U.S. security strategy in East and Northeast Asia. By moving closer to Russia and China, what the North Koreans have effectively done is to enlist the aid of the PRC and Russia in undermining and even ending the former consensus that existed in the UN Security Council when it came to dealing with North Korea. And now, by possibly preparing to provide Russia with ammunition, North Korea is going to further complicate the lives of policymakers in Washington and in Brussels and NATO, I would add, by giving Russia the wherewithal to put up a better fight, if you will, in the war in Ukraine. And then finally, going back to the point that you made earlier, if these reports of trilateral military exercises among Russia, China, and North Korea are accurate, and they may be, if that is the case, then we're going to see a further evolution of this trilateral strategic cooperation in the region, in the East Asia region, and perhaps beyond, and that's something to keep our eyes on.
Right. Now, Dr. Goh, I wanted to talk about North Korea specifically now. Last week, we saw it test cruise missile and claiming that it was successful, but South Korea's JCS says it was not all that successful. So, in your point of view, with the recent launches, have North Korea's missile capabilities actually advanced in recent times?
So, yeah, most definitely. I mean, we know that North Korea's missile capabilities is progressing by leaps and bounds, and we have seen this in the last 3 or 4 years. And what North Koreans are trying to show now is it's less about technical maturity of their missile systems, more about the implementation or deployment and actual operational deployment of their missile systems. And that was exactly the objective behind the recent so-called nuclear attack test. So what North Koreans did this time, by launching these 2 cruise missiles, which they have done before, but whereas before North Korea launched these cruise missiles to show the technical maturity or completeness of their development of their cruise missiles. This time around, they wanted to show how fully operationally deployed this missile happened to be. So they claim that they launched these cruise missiles under the simulation of attacking their North Korea's opponents with nuclear-tipped cruise missiles, and that involved the checking the implementation of the launch protocols, and also as tracking the missiles, as well as making sure that this missile detonated. But then this time around, they didn't use the actual live nuclear warhead. Obviously, what they used is a test warhead, and so they claimed the test happened to be successful, and they showed photographic evidence of that with an explosion in the air. But the reason why the Korean Joint Chief of Staff claims that the test hasn't been that successful is because North Korea claimed to have launched 2 cruise missiles which independently succeeded in exploding. But then the South Korean military has only observed 1 successful explosion. So this just still shows, definitely there's a reason to trust the South Korean side more than the North Korean side in this case. And then I think the reason what this episode shows is that even though despite the fact that North Korea has claimed having achieved the maturity with their missile development, there's clearly some way to go in terms of perfecting their technical sufficiency. So I think that's what the Joint Chief of Staff is pointing at.
Right, and as someone that followed along this side of the story, would you say it was a fast advancement in the recent years, or?
This is where I think we suspect that Russia had a hand. So I think many watchers of North Korea's missile development clearly see there's an inflection point in the history of North Korea's missile development. We will say that it happened sometime between 2016 or so. Before that, North Korea followed a very slow trajectory of missile development with many failures. But for some reason, for whatever reason, after 2016, North Korea has not just been able to advance their missile program rapidly with much higher success rate with their test, but also they've been able to deploy and showcase a large variety of different missiles. North Korea right now possesses 3 different types of intercontinental ballistic missile. So in a country with such constrained resources such as North Korea, it wouldn't be economically efficient for them to develop 3 different types of very expensive ICBMs. But for some reason they are able to do that. And then given the similarities between the Russian missile designs and the operational capability with the North Korean ones, it's very possible that the Russians are getting very active assistance from the Russians.
Now, Evans, I wanted to kind of speak to you about on the high level. We're talking about the practical missiles, but is there a message behind all these provocations recently? So what are the reasons for North Korea's recent provocations? And what strategic objectives do they aim to achieve through their recent series of these launches?
I think it's important to see what these North Korean, the context in which these North Korean activities are taking place. They're taking place in the context of the resumption of these very effective large-scale U.S. ROK military exercises. And I've been a big supporter of those exercises, and I'm glad to see them resumed. Pyongyang is not so happy to see them resumed. And when the United States and the ROK carry out these military exercises, the KPA, the Korean People's Army, the North Korean People's Army, is compelled to respond. They have to demonstrate their readiness, their capabilities, and their strength because they don't want to be seen as being military pushovers. But that's actually one of the advantages of conducting these large-scale exercises, because when we conduct these exercises, it puts a strain on the North Korean military. The KPA has to use scarce fuel and other resources. The exercises that they have to carry out cause wear and tear on their equipment. They break equipment, etc. And so by using missiles, by carrying out these exercises, this is actually placing a strain on the North Korean military, and that is a good thing. But in terms of strategy, one of the things that Dr. Gov't has pointed out I think is worth underscoring here, and that is some of those recent exercises were specifically aimed at dry runs of nuclear attacks on the Republic of Korea and occupation strategy for South Korea. If nothing else, this tells us that the time for any illusions about North Korean intentions is over.
Right, and also speaking of messages, another military parade is expected to take place on the 9th of this month, marking the third one just this year. So what can we anticipate from this parade in terms of its significance and the content?
Well, in addition to the martial music and the nighttime displays of equipment, it'll be interesting to see if there are any speeches given. It'll be interesting to see what specific array of equipment that they're rolling out. There's always a message in the types of equipment and how many of the various gadgets that they demonstrate. And so these things will all bear careful watching, but I don't know that it's going to tell us anything more than we already know about North Korean capabilities and North Korean intentions.
Right, and certainly be cheaper than launching actual rockets.
Indeed.
Right. So speaking of this 9th of September, do you expect more provocations from North Korea to celebrate, well,
yeah, exactly.
speaking of,
that's right.
to reserve mark the occasion?
Yeah, so we've been expecting North Korea to test the Cholima space vehicle for a while, but then for some reason it's not taking place. Realistically speaking, it's probable that the North Korean leadership came to the realization and accepted the reality that they haven't achieved a sufficient technical development to successfully carry out the launch of the space vehicle. So maybe they're postponing it again. But then, they can make up for it by launching more like a tested and proven system, such as their Hwasong-18 intercontinental ballistic missiles, to mark the anniversary of and celebrate the anniversary of the foundation of the Republic. But then, but I think that will be the extent to which North Korea would go with the provocations. And I think the focus now will be more about raising their international prestige in the international arena. And clearly here, Russia is lending a hand. I think we know that Kim Jong-un might be traveling to Vladivostok to attend the Eastern Economic Forum right after the September 9th anniversary day. So I think it's possible that Kim Jong-un is trying to use the occasion to signal that North Korea is back, has returned to the international diplomatic stage, and that North Korea is at the same level as is shoulder to shoulder with major powers such as China and Russia. So I think maybe the North Koreans are now distracted and more focusing more in these diplomatic efforts.
Right. Unfortunately, that's all the time we have for today's edition. But it seems like we're just going to have more questions for you, Dr. Go and Evans, going forward. So thank you so much for your time, and hope to see you guys soon again.
Yeah, pleasure.
Thank you.
Well, that's all for Within the Frame tonight. We'll be back tomorrow with more in-depth stories. Thank you for watching, and goodbye.
Loved and watched around the world. We want to make more animations to reach more children. Traveling time and space. Developing adventure and curiosity.